Some people joining. Hi, everyone. Welcome to those who are joining. We're going to give it maybe another minute. There's a lot of folks who are joining, so just to get a few more. Okay, I think we can go ahead. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Julia Durante Martinez, and I work with LISC's National Community Research and Impact Team. And we manage the LISC Institute for Community Power, which shares resources on transformative practices and policies that seek to advance racial and economic justice and spark development without displacement. And we're really thrilled to be hosting today's conversation on how to build power and secure resources to expand tenant and community control of housing. We had over 500 people sign up for this webinar, which I think speaks to the excitement about this topic and just the timeliness of this conversation as investor acquisition across all different kinds of housing, from single family to manufactured housing to multifamily, is increasing, and the pandemic-fueled eviction crisis continues with communities around the country continuing to see double-digit rent increases. And just this week in New York City, where I'm based, city and state housing data revealed that almost 90,000 rent-stabilized apartments are vacant and being intentionally held off the market by large landlords, despite a historically high number of people that are entering the homeless shelter system. And a recent ProPublica investigation that just came out revealed how rent-setting software used by major landlords throughout the country are driving up rents. And recent research from our team at LISC reinforces how speculation by corporate and private landlords is a major driver of evictions and worse housing maintenance quality, especially in low-income communities of color, and also recommends strategies to build tenant power to strengthen tenant protections and protect housing from the speculative market by moving it into community ownership. And these types of transformative solutions are our focus for today. And so throughout the country, tenants and community partners are organizing to buy their buildings to fight displacement and preserve affordability and improve housing quality, and have won some major victories from the Bronx to the Twin Cities to the Bay Area and more places. So we're really excited to have folks who have been part of this powerful work in the Bay Area here with us today to share how organized tenants have partnered with community land trusts to reclaim their homes and the financing and resources and other forms of support that made these acquisitions possible. So we're going to start just with some brief presentations from our panelists who are going to give an overview of their work, and then move into a roundtable discussion with some time for Q&A after that. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat throughout, and we'll take those towards the end of the session. And of course, we'll share the recording and the slides and other materials, reports and other things that are referenced with everyone after the event. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Wu, the Executive Director of LISC Bay Area, to start us off.
Thanks, Julia. Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be here with all of you. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. So I'm Cindy Wu, Executive Director of the LISC Bay Area team, and we really work to help create a Bay Area where every unique person and neighborhood can thrive. We hope that we can be the connective tissue between people, organizations, systems, and capital. So we resource community-based organizations like SFCLT and OakCLT to make sure that neighborhood residents and leaders like Lorenzo are leading the way and have the resources they need. Getting a message, hard to hear. How's that? Any better? All right. Okay, so one of our major initiatives is the Partnership for the Bay's Future. We have 2 affordable housing funds in this initiative and have provided $350 million in financing since 2019. And this has helped to build over 3,900 homes for Bay Area residents. And in one of these funds, over 700 of these homes have been preservation units. So keeping tenants housed in their current homes and bringing affordability restrictions to those units. I think another interesting data fact is that 95% of the tenants have self-identified as people of color. So this really points out that preservation is a critical strategy in the 3 Ps framework, especially in hot markets like the Bay Area. It's an important tactic against the displacement pressures that we see in our real estate market. There's 2 resources I'd like to share with you today. First, a brief on preservation and how intermediaries and funders can support the preservation ecosystem. That includes capital, capacity building, policy, data, and convening. We will share that. And then the second is a playbook on campaigns to win opportunity to purchase policies in your local jurisdictions. So these come from the work of the partnership, and we would be really happy to talk to you about any of the information in them. I'm really excited for the panel today to see these friends lift up their work. We are really looking forward to more opportunities to work with you all in the preservation ecosystem. And so one big opportunity that's upcoming is with California State, the Foreclosure Intervention Housing Preservation Program, or FIP. And another big opportunity that's coming up is the 2024 Regional Affordable Housing Bond that will go to voters in that election in 2024. This is being led by a coalition including NPH and has a carve out for preservation. So I think there's more resources coming down the pipeline for preservation, and we really want to make sure to play our role in making sure the ecosystem is ready, and especially the part of the ecosystem that supports CLTs. So with that, I will either hand it back to you, Julia, or go to Lorenzo.
We can go right to Lorenzo Listana, who's one of the co-founders of Filipino CDC.
Thank you, Julia and Cindy, and all attendees in this event. So my name is Lorenzo Listana. I am a community organizer in the resident of Tenderloin for over a decade. I also co-founded in 2015 the first Filipino Community Development Corporation, like focusing on affordable housing. So for context, Tenderloin is like located in the heart of San Francisco. It's like 40 square blocks with over 30,000 residents, mostly, seniors, low-income family, working families, and people with disabilities. So this is actually the only remaining low-income neighborhood in San Francisco. So the housing stock there in our neighborhood is like 24% permanently affordable, 22% market rate, and 54% rent controlled buildings. So I was involved in one of the buildings that was like recently bought by San Francisco Community Land Trust, which is one of building that's owned by a private corporation. So in 2017, actually 2016, the Mosser Corporation bought the building, and after a month they raised the rent by 10%. But right after that, in 2017, they started raising the rent again by middle of 2017 by 30%. The residents fought back, and we organized. Then we lobbied to the city hall. then we're able to stop them from implementing the 30%. But again, before the end of 2017, there was another rent increase that was like, being imposed on them. So it's a 70% rent increase. They're mostly BIPOC people, long-term, low-income tenants, like around 10 to 30 years. So seniors, with disabled and working families. So what I did was like, because I was connected with them, some of the tenants there were my member of the Tenant Filipino Community Association, which I founded in 2010. So I did like door-to-door outreach to residents. Then from there, we were able to form like a tenant core leaders organized for this campaign, and at the same time, we're building coalition to actually fight back, because the 70% increase would actually be would start in May 1st of 2018.
Lorenzo, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I know you're in a coffee shop, but there's a lot of background noise that's making it hard for folks to hear. I don't know if it's possible to move to a quieter part of the cafe maybe, but I'm seeing a lot of notes come into the Q&A.
Oh, okay. Let me see. Maybe I should. Yeah, this is more coffee. Hold on. Maybe I'll transfer after my presentation. So sorry about that.
If you want to, I'm so sorry. We could, if you want to move, we could move to Saki to speak about San Francisco and come back to you. Is that better?
Yep,
okay.
Better. Okay, thank you.
All right, so we're gonna turn it over to you, Saki, and come back to Lorenz.
Sure. Okay, thank you so much, Julia. So I'm not sure if you will have my slides as well popped up. Okay, I think that might actually be not the first slide. I just want to say thank you to Lorenzo. I know how hard it is as an organizer to actually make the time for this kind of work. So I'm just so excited that he could even join us, period, because I know that, he's right in between doing the work that really, really matters. In the sense of that, I think community land trusts are starting to realize more and more the critical relationship with tenant organizers and tenant organizations. Because really, if we're going to walk the walk of resident empowerment and centering democracy and resident participation, we really have to start with the tenant organizing. And I think that's really the background and history of San Francisco Community Land Trust is it really was a initiative of tenant activists and tenant organizers who in 2003, I'm seeing that it's going back and forth. That's okay, Julia. You could just start from whatever slide. You can even go to the Columbus United. Perhaps that's actually an excellent starting place, because Columbus United Cooperative was the first project of San Francisco Community Land Trust. And it was a project, as I mentioned, which really brought together the tenant organizers and tenant activists that were contemplating, the creation of a community land trust in San Francisco and realizing the need. And so we're talking about the early 2000s. This is sort of like after the boom and bust of the dot-com bubble and a huge wave of displacement of tenants, and especially people of color. And the San Francisco Community Land Trust was able to center around one particular building. And this is and you can stay on this one because it's really about this Columbus United Cooperative in Chinatown, a 21-unit building in Chinatown, and the majority of tenants being first-generation Chinese and Chinese Americans, the majority being monolingual Cantonese speaking. That started to work with the tenant organizers forming San Francisco Community Land Trust to save the building. First from speculation, then from a demolition. It was a long story. It was originally owned by the San Francisco Community College, and then there was an idea to demolish it at some point. And the tenants really, wanted not just to make it into a permanently affordable rental, but to really advance limited equity home ownership, and turn it into creating pathways for ownership for people of color. So this building eventually, through a lot of agitation and working also with the city, with supervisors and with the community, was finally able to purchase this building. It was a $7.6 billion purchase. And it's a really interesting story of a lot of different sources of funding that came together to create the capital stack for this building, and which is similar to the acquisition of the building that Lorenzo was just talking about, which is 285 Turk. So I start with this project because this project in a lot of ways is the model for 285 Turk, the building that we just acquired in the Tenderloin that Lorenzo was providing the background on, sort of the part of the story before the land trust came in, which is the really, and I think all of us understand as EDs of community land trusts, the huge amount of work and effort and activism and organizing that goes into a building and sort of the purchase of a building once it comes to our sort of door, and where we can act on it. So I'm hugely thankful again to Lorenzo and organizers like Lorenzo that are doing this work. So 285 Turk, I don't know if we can go to that slide or if it's sort of stuck. So we can go to 285. Yeah, exactly. So this is a building in the Tenderloin, very different kind of neighborhood from the building in Chinatown, the Columbus United Cooperative. This building is also a majority people of color building, very different demographic than our Chinatown building, the majority being Filipino, Black, Latinx, and actually a majority of that Latinx community actually being Mayan indigenous from the Yucatan Peninsula. This was a $10.4 million purchase, and this was the purchase that actually we partnered on with LISC and with Self-Help Credit Union. And this building, very different from the capital stack of the other building, where we were able to basically leverage several different sources of public financing. Here, we actually used our small sites, our public financing portfolio to gain private dollars. So of course, not entirely private dollars because we're talking about LISC, we're talking about Self-Help Credit Union. So these are very friendly lenders, but we did not use any soft debt. So this is a completely hard debt project, as you can see. So the majority of the capital stack being our Self-Help Credit Union loan, our LISC loan, and then a very large amount that was actually raised in donations and foundation funds. So we were able to raise around $2 million in the end of foundation dollars. And that's really what we use to kind of go into the building to create that deep affordability, along with our partners like LISC and Self-Help. So this is kind of the model for where I think we'd like to go in the future, in the sense of that this building, like CUC, we're attempting to create, turn into a limited equity housing cooperative. The reason for why we partially used the entirely private financing to do this to convert this building into affordable housing is because we wanted it to become ownership, and we knew that if we were completely stuck with city financing and public dollars, there would be restrictions on that kind of conversion. So this is kind of like the primary reason for kind of putting together this sort of this capital stack. I think I'll stop there. I probably overspent my time, so sorry about that. I'll stop here, and I'll answer more questions later if anyone has any.
Thank you so much, Saki. Lorenzo, did you find a spot? You're muted.
No, yeah, I found the spot.
Okay, good. I'll go back to you, and then we'll circle back around to Steve to hear about Oakland.
Okay.
Yes.
So oh, are you putting up the slide that I? Okay. Yeah. So again, I'm sorry. This is Lorenzo. So to continue, this slide's kind of like my experience in like organizing and like winning something for the residents of Tenderloin. So it took me and took us like, the tenants of 285 Turk 5 years to sustain campaign to actually make this happen. So a while ago, I said that, from the outreach, from the door to door, I went door to door and all, before it was like 30 units, at 30 residents there when I started organizing. So then I was able to create like, core leaders out of the 30 who stayed with me until like the end. Like then at the same time, we're building the coalition to actually pressure the owner. First it was to cancel the rent increase that they were imposing. So it was a lot of work because we did a lot of different actions. We had petition signing, lobbying with city officials, rally multiple times, and we're even covered by the television network and was in the TV news. So then we had this like dialogue with Moser a couple of times, the owner of the building, and had a negotiation with him. So then after like 4 months of campaign, we were able to convince them that that the people will not be able to the tenants will not be able to afford the 70% rent increase. So the campaign was a success. Then we didn't stop there. That we're able to cancel the rent increase. We thought that the only solution for the long term is like convert 285 Turk into a permanent affordable housing. So we've reached out to like the big nonprofits in the Tenderloin and other, like the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation in the Meda to buy a 285 Turk. At the same time, we're also like reaching out to the land trust. So, but the big nonprofit said, "Oh, it's a small building." So they said, like, if it's like over 100 units, then we're okay with like pursuing it. But the good thing is like, the land trust actually stick with us since 2018. We started talking with the leadership of land trust. Then in 2020, during the COVID, we start like, going to the details of like, how do we purchase this building? So, as an organizer, I continue with like, building relationship with them, building their capacity. So, so we have meetings like almost every week during the time. Then by January 2022, after 5 years of like organizing work, sticking out, like, now sticking out with the tenants that this will be turned into like a permanent affordable housing, Land Trust was able to acquire it in January of 2022. So yeah, that was like a story behind, the tenants organizing to purchase this building. And the next step would be how to convert it into like a co-op, a real cooperative housing. That would be the next step. I'm excited about that.
Thank you so much, Lorenzo, for sharing that story. And I think there's a lot of questions coming into the Q&A that we'll dig into in the discussion. So now we're going to turn it over to Steve King at the Oakland Community Land Trust to share a bit about their work.
Hey everyone, thanks Julia. Get to my slides there. Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Steve King, on staff at Oakland Community Land Trust. I was just going to share a few slides to kind of contextualize the history where OCLT came from and share a little bit about the project that's on the docket for today. So we were founded in 2009, grew out of a community organizing effort in Oakland related to the impacts of foreclosure in the city, and starting in about 2007. And as you all know, that we are in the midst of an evolving crisis related to housing. And in Oakland and San Francisco, what that looks like is, typically displacement and exclusion. And so we've been working to develop OCLT as a flexible, responsive tool to community where it's really needed, as a tool to prevent displacement, to build power with residents, to fight against the speculation that is just a persistent threat to low income and Black and brown communities in Oakland, and build shared community wealth together. Next slide, please. To give you a sense of where we've come from, what we've got in trust now, 45 sites throughout the city. That includes 68 housing units across a mix of different housing typologies, single family home ownership. We're working with a group of tenants that we've purchased occupied single family homes and are in a process of transitioning them to owners in the land trust. Multiple transitional housing sites and single family homes for women with children, working with Moms for Housing and another organization called the Diamond in the Rough. We have a handful of multi-unit mixed use projects, including some community serving commercial space, and have a burgeoning community gardening urban ag program run by our residents to create spaces for growing food in our land trust. Next, please. Just to give you a sense kind of the geography, OCLT is really focused on what is typically called the flatland neighborhoods of Oakland between the 880 and 580 corridors. It kind of runs from east to west Oakland. On the image here, the star is the location of the 29th Avenue project that we'll talk about today. It's in kind of right in the heart of the Fruitvale neighborhood in Oakland. Next slide. And just a few details about the Fruitvale. It's 65% Hispanic Latino neighborhood compared to, between 20 and 30% in the region in Oakland. So pretty unique demographic situation. Next slide. And also some real significant economic challenges. Rents, obviously throughout the Bay Area, are just completely off the chart. Average rents in the 5-county region are over $3,300 a month. In Oakland, approaching $2,900. And in the neighborhoods that we're talking about today, approaching $2,200. Obviously, persistent issue is that incomes and wages are not keeping up with the rents, and in the Fruitvale, median household income is below $50,000 a year, which, folks at that level can really only afford about $1,200 a month in rent if they're paying a third of their rent or a third of their income for rent. Okay, next slide. So the 29th Avenue project, 1534 29th Avenue. This is a very similar story to the Turk Street project. And one unique thing about this project is that the building was built in the 80s, in the late 80s, and in Oakland, that qualifies the project for being exempt from the city's rent control ordinance. So the property owner here had been steadily increasing rents of the longtime tenants and legally doing so, and also not maintaining the building. So tenants, were fed up fighting longtime rent increases and pushing the owner to make improvements, and ultimately went on a rent strike to really force the landlord's hand, and that started right before the pandemic, and obviously into the pandemic created all kinds of other economic issues. I can get into the details of the transaction, but you could go to the next slide, Julia. We were, after about 3 years of working with the tenants, we're successfully able to purchase the property just a couple months ago at the end of June. And I'll stop there and we can dig into the details.
Thank you so much, everyone, for those presentations. Super powerful work and just really inspiring to hear all of it. So we're going to, we have a couple discussion questions just to kick things off. I know there's quite a few also that have come in to the Q&A, so we will get to those. I think Elizabeth is helping to kind of organize them a little bit, and then we can maybe weave them in. But I think, Lorenzo, you give such a great overview of how tenants built power to win some concessions on their rent, and then how that sparked interest in buying the building together. I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit on kind of keeping people engaged through that process, and what sorts of trainings and support you're thinking about, especially now as the next kind of vision for the project is to convert to cooperative ownership.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. So when I start, my background is actually like really like community organized. I've been like when an immigrant, in the U.S. So when I was in college, I was like it was during martial law in the Philippines. So I was a student activist for like over, during my college days. When I moved here to San Francisco, then I was amazing because it's like the work that I was like I did in the Philippines now being like here in San Francisco as a community organizer. So that's really perfect for me. So then then oh sorry, can I get your question again?
No, I
Julie?
was love you bringing in your story. I was like listening to that instead. Yes, I think that's really relevant actually to the question, which is how you sort of kept tenants engaged this long process
Correct.
from 5 years, and then now thinking through kind of next steps for supports to transition to co-op ownership.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we did like a lot of different things. First, like I because there are Filipino there, so that's my natural like base in that building. So I connected with them because they were members of the organization that I founded. It's called the Tenant Filipino Community Association. From there, it just expanded. Then what we did is like we did like trainings and meetings all the time, like just to figure out how this campaign would move forward. So of course, there are things that we just build relationship with them, we had like even like karaoke night just for them, just to, it's not just all about like it's relational. It's also so important for like people to bring together. So yeah, then because we have different like organization to support it, and I like they felt that this is not just their own fight, so that's so important for us, for us organizers, that the people like especially the tenants at 285 Turk, wherein they haven't had the chance to actually like fight back for a long time, but this is now the chance for them to actually like assert their rights. Then with people supporting them, they feel like that they have, they can win this fight. So just to continue building relationship, building their trust, and just instilling hope for them that there's a chance for us to actually buy this building, convert this into a permanent affordable housing. But there are a lot of things that they were involved, like we brought them to City Hall in lobbying. We bring them in, like even the negotiations with like Moser to stop the rent increase. We always bring them, they speak for themselves, they advocate for themselves. That's the key. I think that's why we stayed together until like we're able to buy the building.
Thank you so much. So we have quite a few questions, I think, about the financing, especially for the Turk Street project. I'm wondering if, and this might be for the CLTs and for LISC Bay Area folks, if you could just speak to kind of what the underwriting looked like, including how the loan works, whether it supports the conversion to tenant ownership, and then this point about the restrictions on ownership from public funds that kind of prompted the need for so much private subsidy to start. And there's a lot more questions too, but we can start there.
I'm happy to step in, Julia, if you don't mind. I see a lot of questions about how does limited equity homeownership work? So just to give a little bit of background on that. As community land trusts, we create affordability through split title of land and housing. So like the typical model of a community land trust is you have a 99-year ground lease on the land, and then the tenants collectively own the structure in multi-unit housing, or if you have single home family unit, then it would be a single owner. So that's kind of how we create that affordability, is that through that split in title, and then resale restrictions that are placed on the improvements on the home itself, which create, a sort of term of appreciation, which is different from market. So basically, you make maybe an appreciation of a modest return of like up to 4%, but not more than that. And maybe in many cases it's 1 to 2%, right? So you get your initial deposit plus that kind of appreciation. Anything that you value added through improvements. And that's kind of how that model works. Now, limited equity housing cooperatives is something else that we can layer as community land trusts in creating opportunities for homeownership, particularly in the urban multi-unit residential context. In this case, what happens is the residents would own shares, and shares are usually set at a price that's affordable, right? So it doesn't really reflect necessarily the development cost of the unit, which can be really high and astronomical in the city of San Francisco, for example. It can be $600,000 per unit. We try to keep it really affordable, like something like $10,000 or $20,000 for shares in your unit, and those shares basically give you the entitlement to occupy that unit as an owner. So you have a lot of the same entitlements that you would have with home ownership, in the sense of that you cannot get displaced, you cannot be evicted, you can pass it on to your successors, right? So it's an inheritable right. Similar to the community land trust way in which you transfer property, you at the time of sale will get your deposit plus a modest rate of return on that deposit, plus again any improvements. So that's kind of how limited equity homeownership works. And when you layer that with the CLT model, what happens is the community land trust owns the land, and then the tenants collectively as a corporation of some kind, it could be a nonprofit, could be an LLC, own the building on top of that land. And own it through this share structure. And then the way in which the tenants sort of collectively make decisions about the building and the management of the building, and also the finance of the building and all the different things that are involved in home ownership, they do through a co-op board. And that's a democratically elected co-op board. So that's limited equity home ownership, sort of in a nutshell. And then the question is sort of like, well, how do we do that in a building like 285? And why did we do that? I saw some questions about why we did that. The city financing, the kind of restrictions that the city financing had. So to give a little bit of history, the small sites program came into effect in San Francisco in around 2014. Actually, San Francisco Community Land Trust was a very large player in the drafting of the small sites program. And at that time, we really advanced the idea that program, that preservation program, which creates this subsidy, the highest subsidy per unit actually in the country. This program initially was very supportive of creating homeownership through the limited equity housing cooperative model, but then eventually, as the program sort of continued and certain players came into the nonprofit development space, like the Mission Economic Development Agency, the program really slid and went into the direction of creating only permanently affordable rentals. So now it's very hard for us to negotiate with the city to actually convince the city to allow for a provision that would allow for conversion to limited equity housing cooperative, because in their mind, the biggest way in which to make the impact with their public dollars is to just simply create a permanently affordable rentals. And we don't agree with that. We think that renters should not be kept renters for their whole lives. We think renters should have the opportunity to stay in their home, but also become home owners of their units. So I'll stop there, but I know there's probably more questions. With LISC, just so not putting LISC in an uncomfortable situation, this is a short-term commercial loan, right? So it's a 5-year loan. Same with the self-help credit union loan. So we don't plan to convert in the period of those 5 years. We're moving in a long sort of timeline with co-op education involved. So conversion takes many, many years in most cases. And in the case of Columbus United, it also took 5 years. So we have a timeline for providing education, and built into the model, similar to what we did with Columbus United, is a resident education and outreach coordinator who actually is financed partially from the project finances. And in this case, it came out of the donation dollars that we're able to raise, the $2 million that we're able to raise to purchase this building. And we have a resident education outreach coordinator who's fully bilingual, Spanish, it was critical that Lorenzo spoke Tagalog because most of the community there is Filipino, but a lot of the community also there is Latino or Latinx. So we really felt that it was important to have our resident education outreach coordinator speak Spanish. So that is what we're doing now is we're working with her, a woman named Zenaida Corona, who actually lives in the building as well, to work with the residents to move them towards limited equity housing cooperative over this 5-year span. So I'll stop there. I know I said a lot.
No, that was great. And I think there were just more questions about for the private gap funding that was raised, especially how you brought donors on board for that, sort of what kind of messaging was most helpful. And then just elaborating too on maybe some of the additional freedom that was provided maybe through the private funds versus what are the restrictions from the public.
Yeah, so it was, quite fantastic, the donations round. I think we were really surprised by the response. It was an incredible response. I think in part, I absolutely have to thank our two supporters, foundation supporters, the Solidaire Network and the Katali Foundation. These were two foundations that really donated a lot to this. They were our sort of primary funders. And Solidaire is a really interesting organization. They're a movement-based organization that really is looking to benefit BIPOC-led projects. And around that time, actually, a lot of their, the time during our campaign, they were very focused on the Crenshaw Rising, movement that was going on in Los Angeles. And when Crenshaw fell apart, sadly, a lot of those same people were looking for opportunities to invest, to donate to projects that were BIPOC-led like ours. So that was really, really great because I think in a way it's strange how things happen in this domino effect where sometimes all the momentum built around one very different and distinct movement actually can benefit another somewhere else, when that falls, just because of the consciousness awareness raising that those movements really bring. So there, I think we were able to really benefit from the momentum around this idea of community land, ownership over land. So Solidaire is one really big one. The Katali Foundation, also really fantastic organization led by Amaka Agbo. She has an incredibly interesting framework around restorative economics and regenerative economics. So I think she really saw as well the potential for this building and the LEHC model, and specifically with the demographics of the folks in the building, really understood this potential of, wow, could we really bring people who have very little assets in a really, really difficult part of San Francisco. Like, just to give a little bit of context, the Tenderloin is a place that has sort of naturally resisted gentrification for as long as I've known. I mean, I grew up in the Bay Area. I went to school in San Francisco. I know San Francisco very well. And the whole time that I've ever known the Tenderloin, it's exactly kind of the way that it is today. And I think there's new hope in sort of, recent years about the idea that maybe we can actually transform that neighborhood. There's a huge fight as well that's going on in the neighborhood around the unhoused population, but I think there's a lot of hope as well in the neighborhood around this idea that potentially the people there could actually take control and find ways in which to create ownership, and that sort of natural resistance to gentrification has actually also created this kind of natural affordability, which is very, very different from other parts of the city. So I think many people of color without much assets can't really imagine owning something outside of the Tenderloin just because of the astronomical price of land and real estate. So I think it creates strangely an opportunity, even though it's in a very difficult context. So that's sort of the context of the Tenderloin. And I think, the Katali Foundation really thought that they recognized that this interesting opportunity. So I think that's a really big part of the story. What was the other question? So there was the question about the foundations and the foundation dollars. There's a question around the small sites program and the city financing. I think I might have answered both. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And I see you've been answering some of these questions in the chat, Steve, but maybe we can go to you just since the Oakland acquisition did use some city subsidy. If you could just talk a little bit about what that looked like, the combination of the LISC financing, city financing, and how that all came together.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. Yeah, we've been lucky in Oakland. I mean, through a series of, or a long time work of organizing and essentially raising public funds for anti-displacement work, to actually have a program that the city established specifically for community land trust and housing cooperative preservation. That was established out of a bond measure that was passed in 2016, and a new bond that will be on the upcoming ballot in this coming November. So we are in a fortunate position to actually have a commitment from the city of Oakland, and they're really working with us to create a pathway. I mean, they recognize that this model is unique, and that we're purchasing properties and operating them as rentals for a sort of a short period or a holding time, and really have this vision of transitioning to resident ownership. And so they've been working with UHAB in New York City on just to better understand how the cooperative model works. And we're obviously layering that with the community land trust, and to ensure the permanent affordability and provide a long-term support for residents in our co-ops. But yeah, so in terms of our financing, we had a low interest loan from LISC through the Partnership for the Bay's Future, which was really crucial, and just sort of recognizing the fact that rents in projects like this are low. That's why they're a target on the market. That's why investors are coming after them, because they're trying to displace folks and bring in higher paying tenants. So being able to underwrite projects at existing rents or even lowered rents, we're actually in the process of lowering rents for many of the tenants. Such a crucial component. And then having that city commitment in hand when we started talking with LISC, I think was an enticing proposition. And then OakCLT contributed a little bit of our own funds just in terms of pre-development expenses. So I'll stop there.
Okay. I also see a question about soft-ish or friendly lenders to community land trusts and limited equity co-ops. And the question, I think, maybe for these projects, but maybe others as well, if there have ever been sort of traditional lenders involved in the capital stack. And then maybe a follow-up question for LISC area folks is to speak a little bit about, like, from the lending kind of side of things, any particular questions or challenges that came up in lending to a community land trust with a shared equity, limited equity co-op component, and how you kind of worked through those. So first question for CLTs, I guess, is around engaging lenders, and if there's been luck doing that with traditional lenders. And the other question is for lenders, what that process has looked like.
I mean, I can just jump in and say we've really only worked with community development financial institutions, so mission-aligned nonprofit lenders, community banks. We've also raised money with community in a couple of different contexts, but haven't worked with sort of larger institutional banks yet. Or I don't know if we ever will.
I would add that so these projects are first in a what I'll call like the bring it under affordability controls phase, right? So it's not yet in the limited equity co-op phase. And so our loan is sort of a bridge loan to get there. I will say that LISC is able to consider home ownership in its underwriting. I don't think that these loans are set up in a way that directly bridges to the co-op phase, but we are able to consider it, which I think is unique. And so, we're all working the program step by step.
Mm-hmm. And
one more thing I wanted to add: big props to Sally Smith, who is, I see Sally, you're answering questions in the Q&A also. So Sally's the underwriter on this project. So thanks, Sally.
And for you, Cindy, and maybe also Sally, if you want to chime in out loud along with the chat, just any particular questions that came up during the underwriting process and how you worked through those.
I would just say we had a lot of questions for San Francisco Community Land Trust about how the limited equity cooperative model would work, because there are various ways of doing it, as I think is coming up on here. And the helpful thing is that our credit committee, LISC is a national organization with 34 or 35 offices around the country. And our credit committee has seen various models of limited equity homeownership co-ops in New York City, in some other places around the country. We also lend to a lot of co-ops in Washington, D.C. So the credit committee provided me with different questions about how the model would work. San Francisco Community Land Trust was able to answer those questions. And that was more around, will the land trust maintain ownership of the land? How will the land trust provide technical assistance to form the limited equity homeownership cooperative? What will happen with the self-help federal credit union loan? Just like different questions about how they would get there, and then kind of how the affordability would be maintained over time, how the property would be taken care of over time, things like that, right? Kind of who was ultimately responsible for making sure it all worked. So those were the kinds of questions that our credit committee had. I think the San Francisco Community Land Trust level of experience was really helpful with answering those. But what really mattered for the underwriting was that our credit committee, again, has seen a lot of models of ownership and was like generally okay with the idea of ownership. To Cindy's point, right now our loan is for a multifamily rental, but like a small amendment could move it towards our credit committee being comfortable with the ownership. And just to working with Steve and Oakland Community Land Trust, that's a little different because this current project isn't for ownership. We have worked with them on another project that's contemplating ownership. Little different model, but the same kinds of questions come up, which is just making sure the permanent affordability is going to remain there with the land trust owning the land. And then is the technical assistance being provided? Kind of how will the conversion happen successfully? If that makes sense.
Saki, I saw you turned your video on. Did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I mean, I think I did probably answer a lot of those questions regarding the ownership and everything. So I won't revisit that. I will say, yeah, I'm really greatly thankful to LISC for being so open-minded and for really understanding the complexity of our model. I think a lot of lenders really don't get it, right? It's really hard for a lot of lenders to kind of put their minds around this idea of the split title and also this share model and just the resale restrictions, because a lot of, I mean, the mainstream lenders, right? Even with, I think, the great efforts to kind of educate mainstream lenders about our model, still see a lot of risk in the underwriting, find it too risky to get into investing in our models. And I think that's a really big shame, because I think, this kind of ownership, if people could just kind of understand it a little bit better, I don't think presents more risk than other types of home ownership. In fact, when we look at the surveys of community land trust owned properties, there was an inverse relationship to foreclosure, for example, during the foreclosure crisis. We know that, in fact, CLT homeowners were much more able to hold on to their homes, to make their loan payments than people who had regular market rate loans. And I think that these kinds of stories need to get out there, and I think mainstream lenders need to start understanding that in places especially like San Francisco or New York City, and really in urban centers where the price of land and housing is astronomical, limited equity might be the future, if we're going to create pathways to ownership for regular people. So I'm just hugely thankful to that, huge amount of sophistication and understanding within the underwriting team with, just all the things that Sally said about, being comfortable with the model. And I think also I've had great conversations with LISC in Washington, D.C., because there they have 99 limited equity housing cooperatives. That's very cool. Here we have in San Francisco 1 and maybe 2 in 5 years. It's kind of ridiculous because there's no reason why DC can get 100, up close to 100 LEHCs off the ground, and we in San Francisco can only accomplish, 1. and maybe 2. It feels like there really is no reason. There's really no barrier except simply people getting on board and sort of waking up to the fact that this is the way forward, that we need to create these kind of pathways to ownership for people of low and moderate income. Thank you.
Thanks, Saki. I just want to add that for us, the way we structured the partnership, I think allowed for us to be really values driven in who we worked with. So there's a lot of credit enhancement in the partnership, and there's actually grants that help cover staffing time, underwriter time. And the benefit of that is that underwriters aren't then incentivized to do volume to make money basically. And so we could be really values driven in who we want to work with, and the learning that we have to do about how these different models work, and the sort of patience to work the deal, and really be focused on impact in the way that we choose who we work with.
Thanks. And sort of on this point about helping folks understand what these models are and how they work. Lorenzo, your reflections about building relationships and building community and creating space also for joy and fun as part of this process of working with tenants were so important. I'm wondering if you can share too just a little bit about how you talk about these models like community land trust, like limited equity cooperatives, sort of what that kind of education looks like, how to get people excited about this, and have it make sense, because there's ways of talking about it that can be like very wonky and technical, but they're not at their heart about that. So any reflections on that process?
Yeah, thank you, Julia. So actually, we had I think a couple of introductory trainings about the limited equity, model with the tenants of 285 Turk. So the first thing that I observed during the time is they said, oh, we don't have money. We don't have money. How can we be a co-owner when we don't have money? Then, Land Trust was able to it's not the whole, but it could be like a $10,000 equity. So, and it could be actually staggered, So the idea of, but I think what they stick with them is I will be able to, the tenants will be able to stay there until, and can be passed on to their, to their kids. So the idea of not being evicted, not being displaced, and will be able to stay in their community where they live for a long time, and their work is just a few blocks away. It's really make them interested and hey, I should be supporting this model, and they're looking forward to it. Hoping that that would be implemented with the Land Trust, giving directions and educating them in the next years to come.
Sure. And Steve and Saki, I wonder too, from your work, if you also have reflections on this theme of talking to folks about CLTs and limited equity co-ops.
Yeah, I can jump in. I mean, it's just an ongoing process, for us in a project like 29th Avenue. It's an incredible heavy lift for residents to be engaged for, in this case, nearly 3 years, fighting possible displacement, meanwhile trying to organize for a possible acquisition through the CLT, doing that while they have full-time jobs, and so it's a real heavy lift, and we've seen burnout from folks. At the end of the acquisition process, folks, we often have to take a break and let folks just come back fresh for what is really the long haul, because the acquisition is like step 0. All the hard work really starts after that of providing space to build capacity for residents to engage in this process, to acquire the sort of technical skills around financing and property management, and what it really means to have agency and self-determination in their housing. And so, we have a strong partnership with a group called the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment that does kind of organizing on the front end to provide support for tenants kind of up to the point of acquisition. And then the CLT really takes on the work of building that resident capacity for the long term. And I'd say one other thing, in buildings like this, we have a group of tenants that are really doing the heavy lift of creating the cooperative that will, serve generations of families. So there's an incredible amount of work that goes in, kind of this upfront work that really needs to be resourced and understood as an investment in these projects. So, providing resources for training, ensuring that there's language justice, translation and interpretation that Saki and Lorenzo talked about, having childcare at meetings so parents can fully participate. So yeah, just a few things today.
Thank you. Yeah, resourcing the ongoing organizing and training work is so critical. Saki, I saw you nodding along. I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, I was just, thinking about, how much the devil is in the details of all of this, and the importance is the breaking down of all this very long and complex process into steps and sort of micro bite-size pieces. I think that's what can make it really understandable. I mean, everyone right off the bat, when you say, do you want to own a home in San Francisco? They're like, yes. It's not difficult to sell people, on the idea that this is a good idea and that they're going to get something out of it. It's more than talking about the steps to getting there, and that it's not, the process isn't instant. And there are many things to learn. So like one of the things that we really focus on is co-op education, and breaking down co-op education into 5 micro-bite steps, which is, there's new member selection, and how do you fill vacancies, and how do you select new residents, writing the lease. Then there's the governance piece, right? So when you get closer to the time of conversion, but even before then, you need to have your bylaws. We usually start with house rules as a simple way to kind of make that accessible for people, like what kind of common rules do you want to have? But then it's about taking that a step further and thinking about how do we, create an agreement for the long term around all the different aspects of, how a co-op is managed, like some of the things that Steve already mentioned. I mean, because you're not just talking about, living in your unit, you're talking about maintaining an entire building. So it's about understanding the finances of the building. So we have to do financial education. And we both do it on a kind of collective level as well as on an individual level, because as Lorenzo pointed out, like one of the first questions that comes up is, yeah, we want to own in San Francisco, but how? We can hardly save. We live paycheck to paycheck. So how are we going to save? But even $10,000 sounds like a lot for the residents of 285 Turk, who are living paycheck to paycheck. So we have to provide that individual workshops on sort of financial management, and how do we create a savings plan? And so working with our partners on that. So we've started to work, for example, with Self-Help Credit Union, having conversations about what's the criteria for them for working with our residents to start creating individualized savings plans. So that's sort of on the individual level, but then we also need to have on a collective level an understanding of the budget each year and the operating costs, and why is it that we need to implement certain rent increases. We as CLTs, cap our rent increases, so we try to keep them reasonable, not like the 70% insane situation, and even below 5%, we're trying to keep things affordable, similar along the lines of the rent board ordinance, something in the range of 2 and maximum 3.5%. But it's still hard, right, for people to understand, like, oh, why is my rent going up? It's like, but we go through a process of being very transparent and showing, look, it's because of this. We have these increasing operating costs. This is what it looks like. This is what it would look like to bring down those costs. So encouraging people to do things like, use less water or use less electricity. Thinking also about sort of like the overall capital needs of the building, right? That's another, so there's short-term maintenance, but then there's also long-term maintenance. We need to think about in the budget, how are we going to just save not only the operating budget, but also the longer reserve replacement budget? How are we going to save for that roof we need in 30 years? Or how are we going to, replace an elevator in 5 years? Or, these kinds of issues. So there's a lot of steps. So like I said, sort of how you select members, governance, finance, then the short-term and long-term maintenance. And then we also do even conflict resolution, because conflict resolution is a big issue, and communication between residents. So we try to break it down into a 5-step education series. And I know that Steve has the same thing, because we talk with Felix, one of your staff members, quite frequently about these issues and how to share resources. And it is a lot of work. There is capacity involved, and that's part of why we believe that you need, for every single one of these conversions, a resident and education outreach coordinator that has at least 50% of their time dedicated to that project. So that is the model that we have implemented at 285 Turk.
Thanks. So one question that's come up, and I imagine there's a number of folks on the call who are interested in opportunity to purchase, both tenant opportunity to purchase and community opportunity to purchase as a policy tool to help facilitate these acquisitions. So I know the 285 Trick Street was not technically a COPA deal, but just if you have any reflections on how COPA legislation has been helpful, just as part of building the ecosystem for community ownership, and if there are other also policy priorities that you're all fighting for to help expand these models, or if the focus is more on the resident organizing and capacity building, kind of the creative financing strategies piece of things. So I think everyone could speak to that question, but maybe we could start with Saki again about the just the connection with the San Francisco TOPA, and then others chime in, please.
Yeah, thanks so much. So in San Francisco, we are, I think, the one other city, I'm trying to keep track always of the different TOPA movements and how far they are along in their process. I know that, we have TOPA movements in Los Angeles, Minneapolis, New York. Julia, you just told me about it this morning. We have it in East Palo Alto. We have one in Oakland. We have one in Berkeley. So it's like it's really the moment of the OPA, of the Opportunity to Purchase Act. And it's exciting, but many of them are still stalled. They haven't passed through their city councils. So San Francisco is one of the few cities in the whole nation, next to Washington, D.C., that passed their TOPA legislation over 40 years ago, that has an Opportunity to Purchase Act piece of legislation in place. So we passed ours in 2019, and it's a Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, which focuses on qualified nonprofits as a central actor, right? So the way it works is that we have 5 days, just 5 days, which is kind of insane, right, to act on a building. So we get notified first. There's a list of qualified nonprofits. We get notified first when a building is coming up for sale on the market, and we have 5 days to put in a letter of interest. Now, that's tough because a lot of the time, we need to get the buy-in of tenants before we start moving forward with a project, right? So we can put a letter of interest in just based on a kind of rough assessment. And then 25 days later, we actually need to show that we have some kind of commitment of financing, right? So not that the full financing is fully developed, but that we have some kind of a green light from the city of San Francisco. But that's tough because their financing requirements, so the requirements of the Small Sites Preservation Program, require that we actually get 66% of the tenant buy-in. So again, the critical piece of the tenant organizing, right? And that's why I think, for nonprofits and CLTs, that having a tenant organizing arm, either external or internal to the organization, is really critical, because a lot of the times these projects don't come out of nowhere. They come, over time. There's been so much organizing and thought that's been put into them, and then maybe they go out on COPA. And that's kind of the ideal situation, is that you have already organizing that's happening before it comes out on the market, and then you're really able to act on it. Because otherwise we get all these listings, which is fantastic. It's exciting to see every day in my inbox, a pipeline of projects, potential projects, but most of them we can't act on because of two reasons. We don't have the information about the tenants and their willingness, and it's hard to get that all within 5 days. It's even hard to get that within 25 days. And then the second piece is the lack of financing. So, in San Francisco, we have one of the most robust small sites programs, but it's still only 10 projects a year. And that's not that much, given how many COPA listings I see every day. So I'll stop there. Maybe the last thing I'll just say is that due to all of these kinds of issues, we have been pushing in San Francisco for a potential TOPA movement or amendments to COPA to make it more TOPA-like. And when I say that, what I mean is that TOPA creates longer timelines for that tenant organizing piece that I just mentioned. So rather than have 5 days and then 25 days, you would have much more extended periods of time in which tenants can organize. But that's also why people are fighting it, because they don't want to see that real estate transaction timeline getting shortened in any kind of way. But I think we need to say, look, the result of case studies like Washington, D.C. show that, in fact, the sellers are not disadvantaged. And this all still operates on market price, right? So nobody is getting sort of cheated, right, by the legislation and lowering the value of their home. They're getting market rate. Even if the qualified nonprofit can act on it, they can still go out and get a third party price if they feel like that's not fair. So it operates very much within market principles. And in some ways, that's kind of the problem for us, right? Because we have to compete with the market. But yeah, I think that's why we're really pushing for kind of a more TOPA-oriented, tenant-oriented COPA in San Francisco.
Thanks, Saki. That was really helpful. Lorenzo, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. I just want to add the organizing side of this project. So as I've said, like, we were able to create a coalition around the 285 verified. So we've been like talking about how we can be proactive and like doing tenant organizing specifically, especially for like rent controlled buildings and and market rate buildings located in the Tenderloin, and some areas of South of Market. So we will be we're thinking about like doing like an organizing work around those buildings, so that if ever that would be for sale in the future, we are already like in place that we have a tenant organized in that building. So we will be doing that next year. We start doing like more tenant organizing in different buildings in the Tenderloin South Market. So yeah.
Thanks. That's really, really exciting and important. And just as a follow-up, are there any kind of specific criteria or characteristics of the buildings like that helps you sort of focus on which ones you might want to start organizing first? Like, what makes a building a potential good candidate for something like COPA, or is it just trying to expand the organizing base as much as possible to be ready in case something goes up for sale?
Yeah, actually, we started with like if buildings has like habitability issue, like tenants are complaining, like complaining about habitability. So we start with the issue of the tenant, so that we have some entry point and like organizing them. Then that's where you're able to build relationship with the tenants and organize them that, hey, actually this building can be purchased in the future. So we start with like addressing the issues of the tenants, especially we're targeting the rent control buildings, because that is in the tenants, like over 50% are rent control buildings, and most of them they're owned by individuals, private corporations as well. So there's a big possibility that would that would be a subject to to market rate speculation.
So I see a couple folks have asked about something that often comes up in discussions around limited equity housing. If any of you have run into pushback around limiting wealth building potential for tenants of color through using limited equity housing models, and just how you kind of respond to that. And I think maybe a related question that somebody asked is just in speaking with funders, sort of the talking about limited equity, like ownership opportunities versus permanently affordable rental, and how you maybe make the case for both, as may make sense.
Yeah, these are the important questions. Yeah, I did answer one in the chat, but I can kind of verbalize it. You know, I do think it's something that each community kind of needs to deal with on their own and figure out what the right balance is, because, you know, what we're dealing with is really finding or striking a productive balance between individual or household wealth building with community wealth building, and within that is the same balance between, you know, one household's ability to earn wealth versus the long-term affordability of projects. So it's, you know, I mean, it's a difficult question. We struggle with it all the time, but you know, in Oakland, there's so few opportunities to actually own. I mean, I think the other piece here is really about creating pathways for ownership, control, self-determination, and really undoing, you know, a whole history and legacy of, you know, withholding those opportunities from folks. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a few thoughts.
Yeah, I just want to double click on what you said, Steve, and also that the central value here is about self-determination, right? For neighborhoods or a building of tenants to have self-determination, but also I think this narrative shift toward either housing as a human right or housing as a human need, I think moving away from thinking about, I don't know, housing as a commodity, but balancing the idea that folks need stability and wealth generation in their life.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Cindy. I was just going to add one more thing there, that I think, I mean, the onus is really on us to find other ways for families to build wealth that doesn't put their shelter at risk. And so that's something that's on OCLT's mind, of like really creating other economic opportunities for our residents. But yeah, we could use support with that if anyone has any ideas.
Saki, did you have anything to add from San Francisco CLT's experience?
It's a really interesting and important conversation. I think it's one that doesn't necessarily offer like any ready answers, you know, in this kind of, you know, the juxtaposition of, okay, isn't it important to retain homes as a wealth building vehicle while at the same time ensuring the human right to housing? You know, it's really tough. So I think it was presented very well in the comments already made by Steve and Cindy, but you know, I guess part of it is, yeah, I think I agree with that, where Steve landed about the importance of creating other opportunities for wealth building. Maybe we do need to stop making wealth out of fundamental goods, things that are critical to life, like food, water, housing, healthcare, you know, things that education, things that we see as fundamental rights, that perhaps those things are goods that we should just kind of take off the market, and then think about how we can make sure that communities of color have access to wealth building creation through other venues. Like, for example, one of the things I find really interesting about surveys done on community land trusts, including the most recent one that the California Community Land Trust Network did on community land trusts just last year or 2 years ago, it really shows the incredible amount of well-being that it produces in individuals that live in the housing. When you know that your housing is secure, it actually makes you able to take more risks in your life. Like, for example, maybe you're in a dead-end job that you're really unhappy with, where you aren't making that much money. But if you know, once you know that your housing is secure, you can then go back to school or into a trainings program, and you feel the security to do that, right? And I think also, I think many of us can relate to the idea that, like, for example, if we know that we can live with mom and dad while we're going back to school, that definitely will encourage us to do that. While if we don't, it feels precarious. And I think that's kind of what the CLT and the limited equity housing, cooperative housing really offers, especially with this inheritable right. Like, when I look at the HUD co-ops, this is something I hear a lot from people who live in HUD co-ops. It's kind of incredibly damaging when granddaughter lives with grandma and then grandma passes away, and granddaughter, who's been living in that home her whole life, actually has no right to stay there. Whereas a limited equity housing cooperative, perhaps you don't have that wealth generation that that we're talking about, that floats on the market. But what you do have is that inheritable right, and so that's legacy. That's a family and cultural legacy that you're passing on to your child. That's wealth building that you're passing on to your child or your grandchild. And that's huge, to keep that kind of wealth within the family, within the community as well. Because when you talk about using the limited equity housing cooperative in neighborhoods of color, what you're talking about is actually collectively building wealth that stays with the community and that can't be taken away from the community just because of bad luck. Like, the market crashed and now there's a bunch of foreclosures. So it's a really tough conversation, but I think and I think there's definitely arguments on both sides, but I do think that we need to kind of really understand the importance of how security actually allows people to create to take greater risks that create greater economic mobility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think we'll do like one more question and then just invite kind of final reflections from everyone. But just related actually to what you were just talking about, Saki, in terms of market crashes and foreclosure, somebody asked about if you all see a housing downturn or recession coming, as many have been speaking about. Also, someone else asked about high interest rates right now. And if you have any thoughts on the challenges or opportunities that this presents, or are preparing or sort of incorporating this forecast into your strategies.
I'll just say that I was at Chinatown Community Development Center in San Francisco during 2008, 2009, and we just kept feeling like, why couldn't we have bought all the buildings at that time? So this is the best time to buy buildings. I know, paired with interest rates rising, that's hard. So I don't know, it's kind of flipped to say, but like, find the best CDFI you can work with and just like be aggressive. And then I'll make one more for California, one more plug for FIP. With this program coming down the line, I think there might be an opportunity. Maybe there'll be some lower prices in the upcoming years. But I think Steve and Saki and Lorenzo, that's not always true in the Bay Area anyways.
Did either of you want to briefly throw in your perspectives?
I would have just, mentioned FIP again, and that's, been the result of work of CLTs across California and the California CLT network of, seeing a bit of a train coming with the pandemic and trying to prepare for the eventuality of some market downturn. So we're hoping that will be a resource and, kind of building out these other parts of the ecosystem along the way with TOPA and, local sources. Different municipal sources. So that's where a lot of the work actually ends up happening.
Thank you. So just in the last couple minutes, I just want to invite all of our panelists to share any advice you have for groups who are just getting started in this work or interested in whether it's CLTs, cooperatives, opportunity to purchase. I think a lot of great wisdom has already been shared through folks' comments, but any closing thoughts that you have? Maybe we can start with you, Lorenzo.
Yeah, thanks again for inviting me, Julia. And yeah, so I think this model is like a great model that should be replicated, all over the country, because this actually addresses like the long-term, affordability and making housing permanent for like low-income people, even the very low-income people. So this is a chance for us to, for the organizers there to actually be proactive and ensuring that tenants are organized whenever there's an opportunity for them to purchase a building, they've already organized. So that's what we will be doing, in support of this model. So thank you.
I'll jump in to say my best advice is find such smart, dedicated people with such liberatory thinking like these folks on this panel. So Lorenzo, Saki, Steve, just much respect and thanks to all of you.
I would encourage folks to jump in. I mean, the reality is that we're dealing with a housing ecosystem that doesn't support this kind of work at any scale yet. And so the more folks that are jumping in to push for this, for community land trust, community ownership, limited equity housing cooperatives, the reality is we can't continue to shoehorn this community land trust work into the existing model that we have. We need new thinking and new programs to support the work. So we need you all in the fight.
Saki, I think this means you have the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage everybody, if you're not already, to become a dues-paying member of a community land trust near you. I think that's a great way in which to participate. All of our members on our board are, regular people. 1/3 of our board is, actual residents from our properties. And yes, we really do listen to them, even when the decisions are tough. And sometimes, it's not convenient necessarily to listen to what our residents are saying, because we want to grow. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we are keeping the capacity needed to be able to serve our residents well. So it's, I think, I think it's really easy to just join a land trust and actually go from a general member to actually being on the board. And yeah, we need smart people, probably like most of the folks that are sitting here right now, who have skills in all kinds of different areas, because that's the amazing thing about community land trust. We need people in a whole array of skill sets, from finance and real estate development, to having legal backgrounds, to having architecture, construction, project management backgrounds, to, people who have social work backgrounds, know how to work with vulnerable populations and communities, people of color who are rooted in their communities, who bring really important perspectives. So we need all of you. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for taking your time to share all of your expertise with all of us. We know you're all super busy fighting this good fight. And again, are just so appreciative. And there's been folks chiming into the chat asking how they can support your work. And just as a reminder to everyone, we'll share the slide deck, the recording, the reports, everything people shared, and just how you can get in touch with everyone here as well if you would like to support. So thank you all again, and we'll be in touch.
Cheers, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.